Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Saturday Morning Mastermind. I'm your host today, Samantha Studebaker-Carl, broadcasting to you from beautiful Indiana. And I'm here with my good friends Catherine and Lori and Angel. And today we are continuing our discussion of the book, The Big Leap by Guy Hendricks. And we are in this is still chapter 2. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Saturday Morning Mastermind. I'm your host today, Samantha Studebaker-Carl. Broadcasting. Got a little distraction there in the background. Okay, so chapter 2, I believe. Yes, chapter 2. Okay, page 52. We're at the section entitled Hidden Barrier Number 3, Believing That More Success Brings a Bigger Burden. So with that, guys, go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then Catherine, you can read the sections, and we'll finish up this chapter and have a discussion.
Lori Emmons in Denver.
Angel Studebaker down here in South Carolina.
Good morning, it's Catherine Clement, and I'll be starting the reading. Hidden barrier number 3, believing that more success brings a bigger burden. An old belief that you're a burden can hold you back from expanding to your full capacity for success and enjoyment. If this belief has a grip on you, your upper limit mantra goes like this: I can't expand to my highest potential because I'd be an even bigger burden than I am now. Early on in our exploration, I mentioned that it's common for people to have more than one hidden barrier. In my work on myself, I found that 2 of the barriers held the biggest challenge for me. In the last section, I shared my challenges with overcoming the disloyalty and abandonment barrier. Now I want to tell you about the burden barrier, my second major challenge. Check to see if elements of my story resonate with you. The moment I made my appearance in the world, I was greeted with two big mixed messages. You're a burden and you're a celebration. I was a burden to my mother, but a cause for celebration to my grandparents. The reason I was a burden was that my father had died a few weeks after my conception, leaving my mother with $300, my older brother to raise, and unbeknownst to anyone, me in the womb. Mom had no job and would have had a struggle supporting herself and my 6-year-old brother. The unexpected appearance of a new baby was more than the poor widow could handle, and she went into a depression for about a year after I was born. Fortunately, my grandparents were next door, both vital 60-somethings, and they were beyond ecstatic about having a baby boy around. They had raised 4 daughters and were more than ready for a boy. I became the boy they'd always wanted, and there was never a day throughout my childhood that I didn't feel their love and caring attention. Having them next door was a godsend, even after my mother recovered and I began to spend more time at her house. This background is a perfect setup for an upper limit problem later in life. Starting out my life as a combination of burden and celebration caused me to repeat this combination often in adult life. I would have a big positive breakthrough, then immediately start feeling I was a burden on the world. Sometimes the world would pick up on my feeling and present immediate proof that I was indeed a burden. I recall a painful moment when I was in my late 20s at a family gathering with my mother and brother. My first published book had just come out, and I'd brought a copy of it along for each of them. They were sitting at a table chatting when I proudly presented their books. Each of them looked at it, turned it this way and that, then put it aside without opening it or saying a word of congratulations. Then they resumed their conversation as if nothing had happened. I remember standing there dumbfounded. I didn't know about the upper limit problem at the time, so it didn't occur to me that this event was part of a pattern set in motion long before I took my first breath. It took me years to understand what a burden upon them my existence must have been. I can't imagine the struggles they went through trying to cope with my unexpected appearance in their world. It's not surprising they would convict me of the crime of being a burden, so it's not surprising they would consider a book written by me as a burden upon their world. If their perception of me was that I'm a burden, they would naturally see anything I produced as a further burden. What's surprising is the extent to which I had convicted myself of that crime, even though I was innocent of the original imagined transgression. By my 30s, I began to wake up and realize that most of the guilt I felt was for crimes I had not committed. I bet you'll find the same thing. Of course, there are plenty of things I've done on my own that I feel guilty about. I imagine you can think of a few of those too. However, I found that if we remove the guilt of the crimes our parents and siblings convicted us of before we walked into kindergarten, we are liberated from the main issues that trigger the upper limit problem. Hidden barrier number 4, the crime of outshining. The unconscious mantra of the outshining barrier goes like this: I must not expand to my full success, because if I did, I would outshine, fill in the blank, and make him or her look or feel bad. This barrier is very common among gifted and talented children. They get a lot of their parents' attention, but they also get a strong subliminal message along with it. Don't shine too much, or you'll make others feel bad or look bad. The gifted child is often convicted of stealing attention from other members of the family. One unconscious solution gifted children devise is to turn down the volume on their genius so that others don't feel threatened by it. The other solution is to continue to shine brightly, but turn down the volume on their enjoyment of it. If they can appear to be suffering, they can get empathy and sympathy from others instead of jealousy. Kenny Loggins is the role model for how to transcend this barrier and take the big leap. Kenny has a friend and neighbor for many years, and has been a friend and neighbor for many years, and I've gone out on tour with him several times to serve as an on-the-road coach for him and the band. A few years ago, I also worked with Kenny and his old partner, Jim Messina, in preparation for a reunion tour. Loggins and Messina conquered the world of rock music at an early age, attaining fame, fortune, and critical acclaim in their early 20s. Turmoil and creative clashes eventually caused them to break up, and trouble followed them into their solo careers. Kenny found success as a solo artist with a string of hits in the 80s, while Jim tried different avenues such as producing albums for other musicians. Even though Kenny was cranking out hits and winning Grammys, he didn't let himself enjoy the success. When he would have a hit or win an award, he would do something in his personal life to sabotage the potential good feeling and celebration. He would get sick, or have an accident, or mess up a relationship. There was always something, and it was always just after a success of some sort. In working with Kenny extensively and with Jim briefly, I discovered a classic example of hidden barrier number 4. Although they had never noticed it, they had a remarkable similarity in their backgrounds. They had grown up as gifted children trying to compete with a favored sibling for their parents' attention. They also got hidden messages from their parents not to outshine the other sibling. When the talented duo formed their musical union in their late 20s, this early programming worked to their advantage. They were brother figures together, out to conquer the world. They could both shine together, and shine they did, one hit after another. However, when the time came to go solo and follow their own musical paths, the old upper limit problem came back with full force. Now they were both in the grip of the old fear not to outshine the other one. This fear caused one to stumble in search of a new direction, and the other to dampen the enjoyment of his success with one unfortunate incident of self-sabotage after another. Fortunately, they woke up in time. They were able to spot this old pattern and transcend it. Jim launched a new career teaching songwriting workshops. Kenny got the gift of a seeming performance disaster that had a life-changing gift of a metaphor hidden in it. He was nominated for a Grammy, and at the awards show, with most of the music industry in attendance, he took the stage to sing the big hit, I'm All Right. Thunderous applause greeted the distinctive opening notes of the song, but in a masterpiece of irony, when Kenny started to sing the vocal, the microphone didn't work. He saved the moment by jumping on a table and leading an a cappella version until the mic got fixed. But the irony gave him cause for reflection later. Why had he lost his voice at the very peak of his career? The answer led to his big leap and the creation of a masterpiece. He realized that he didn't want to create more of the same kind of staple pop hits that had made him rich and famous. Those were clearly in his zone of excellence, but clearly not in his zone of genius. Although he was proud of the pop hits he'd created, he felt that they still came out of that fear of outshining. Fortunately, he heeded the call of genius and went into a time of deep meditative inquiry about every aspect of his life. In that deep space, he heard a new kind of music coming from within him, songs that touched on the environment, honesty in relationships, and other themes unusual in popular music. The album that emerged had a title appropriate to the role it played in his life, Leap of Faith. It was a massive hit, both commercially and critically, and contained songs such as Conviction of the Heart, which became an anthem of the growing environmentalist movement. This in turn led Kenny to a performance moment that eclipsed any thrill of the past, singing Conviction of the Heart to 500,000 people at an Earth Day celebration in Washington, D.C. One great thing about upper limit work is that it doesn't take much time to spot where the problem is coming from. Once you see it, you've turned on a light in a long, dark room. There's cleanup work that usually needs to be done, but with the light on, it's not that hard. A hex is often put on gifted and talented people early in life. The hex causes them to feel bad when they shine especially brightly. Why would parents hex children this way? An example will explain. I worked with Joseph, a middle-aged executive who had been a piano prodigy as a child. He went on to modest success as a professional musician, but then quit music completely because, without realizing it, he kept running up against hidden barrier number 4. Specifically, each time Joseph had a breakthrough to more success, he would be gripped by guilt and end up feeling worse than before. Even after he quit music, the pattern followed him into his business career. During our first session, we were able to shine a light on the moment in his past when the barrier first got locked into place. Growing up, Joseph had been close to his only other sibling, a sister, who was also a gifted musician. She died of leukemia when she was 8 years old, leaving him and his parents devastated. This loss caused him to throw himself even more passionately into his music. As Joseph told his story, he uncovered a moment in his early teens when he felt the gripping guilt for the first time, the feeling that would so haunt him as an adult. For his birthday, his parents gave him his first grand piano. Prior to this, he had been able to practice on a grand piano only by traveling by bus across town to a music studio. Now he would be able to practice daily, rain or shine. Joseph's parents arranged to have the piano moved into the living room the night before his birthday, after he had gone to sleep. When he woke up in the morning, his parents asked him to close his eyes as they escorted him into the living room. They led him to the piano and asked him to open his eyes. He was seized with joy and gratitude. He hugged his parents and, with tears streaming down his face, sat down at the keyboard. As his fingers were about to touch the keys for the first time, his mother said, "We would never have been able to afford this if your sister hadn't died." Instantly, his joy became suffused with guilt and grief. A pattern was set in motion that would play out for the next 40 years. What would cause parents to say such a thing? Unconsciously, they must have wanted him always to remember his sister and be grateful for the 2 brief years she had graced their family. Unconsciously, they must have felt deep grief that one child could shine brightly and the other would never do so. The pride they felt in my client would always be accompanied by their grief over the loss of their daughter. They were under the spell of this grief for life, and they unwittingly made sure Joseph would live under it too. Fortunately, Joseph was able to break free. He realized the crime for which he'd been convicted, being alive and thus outshining his sister for all time, was a crime that existed only in his parents' imagination. Many of you may find an issue like this in your past. If so, you will need to ask yourself if you are afraid to go to your ultimate success because you're afraid of outshining someone from long ago. Ask yourself if you're afraid your success will steal attention from someone who you've been led to believe needs it more. Going forward, now you're equipped with the background knowledge you need for your big leap. You understand the basics of the upper limit problem and where its root structure is buried. It's time now to increase the velocity of your learning by going directly into the buzzing intricacy of your life experience. Your upper limit problem lives in the moment by moment interactions you have with yourself and the people around you. There's only one way to get this data, and that is to focus your keen awareness on specific aspects of your daily life. In the next chapter, I'll show you exactly where to look to find those things. I predict you'll be amazed at the elegant simplicity of the keys to liberation, and doubly amazed that they have been hiding in plain sight.
Thank you, Catherine, for reading that. Did you want to jump out, Lori? I saw you unmute.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that, but I'll say it. Didn't really have anything right now.
All right, that's fine. Oh, so these are some pretty interesting barriers that can come up in our lives, or that we can maybe shine a light on if they are at play in our lives. And you know, this one, the idea that you know, being a burden, you know, I can think of somebody in my life that his family definitely treated him like he was a burden, and I've seen how that has affected him throughout his whole life, and that it's tough to recognize that at play in someone else's life and not be able to resolve it for them, knowing that, you know, the people that treated them like a burden just didn't know any better. You know, they just didn't know how they were hurting him in that way. And yet, you know, I don't know if he'll ever be able to get past it, you know, if he can recognize that, okay, well, that was a false belief, and that, you know, I don't have to take that on, and I don't have to have that play out in my life. But it's hard. I was trying to think back if I could feel any of that in my own life and where that might have come from, but I don't know. I feel like in some respects, you know, this idea of success bringing a bigger burden. When I saw that kind of that subtitle, I was sitting here thinking more along the lines of you know, when you have more success, there's so much more work involved, and you hold yourself back because of the fear about having too much of a burden in your life. But it was interesting reading this section, and then it kind of went in a whole different direction. So, you guys have any thoughts on this, or have you experienced in your life feeling like you are a burden to other people, or know anybody?
He could have written, I mean, this is like exactly how I came in as well, with this dichotomy of the being a burden and being a celebration. Except I was kind of a burden to both. because I felt, I'm sure as a child, because children are so narcissistic, not in a bad way, but they're so, everything is about them all the time. So I'm sure I felt like I was a burden to my mother and father because they divorced and weren't present in my life. And then my grandmother took me in, but I was definitely a burden to her because she was raising another child and she was a single parent and she worked long, excruciating hours in horrendous pain of her left foot, which I totally like. That's where my CRPS is in my foot. So I swear I have my grandmother's foot in some aspects, but like and I have tried to, I have definitely limited myself. And I also, Samantha, felt like that's where it was going to go, because that's how I look at success. I know that's one of the things that holds me back is that I feel like I have so much on my plate now that I can't even get to and accomplish. How could I possibly be more successful and handle all of that? And I didn't see it as necessarily being like all of that making me more of a burden on the world, but I can definitely, see where he's going. And then the thing about the book, oh my gosh, when I got the first copy of my book, I got a very similar reaction. As a matter of fact, I got even a worse reaction uh, because I put it in a book holder, like those little wooden things that hold books upright. And I put it in one of those, and I was so excited and waiting for my mom to get home, and when she got home, she had had a bad day, So I said, "Look around and see if you see anything," and she looked around, and it kind of pissed her off that she was looking around, and she finally found it. And she's like, "That?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was so excited for her to like pick it up and open it and look at it. And she just like huffed and rolled away, she didn't. So even that part of this chapter was just like, oh my God, he's writing my life here. But it was in that moment, I was that little child again, seeking my mother's approval and not getting it. And it was when he says he was dumbfounded, it goes further than being dumbfounded. Like, at least to me, it was like a stab in my heart. And then, my logical adult self stepped in and kind of comforted that little child and said, you know what, she's had a bad day and she's just wants to sit down and put her feet up. It has nothing to do with anything else other than that. But it's interesting how these wounds from childhood follow us. And I think, and we've said this before, they don't ever go away. They just pop up and you learn to recognize them for what they are. But it doesn't mean that they stop popping up, but they can definitely, I remember there was a little part of me that said, well, maybe my books aren't so special, maybe I won't write anymore kind of thing. I had that sort of little pouty moment. And I was like, no, that's just bullshit. Like, she had a bad day. We tend to put so much meaning into things sometimes. And but the remark that they made, to the little to him about his piano, I mean, couldn't you just feel your heart? Couldn't you just feel that stab in your heart when I read that? When they said the only reason we could afford this is because your sister died. How that I'm surprised he ever played again.
Oh my goodness, Catherine, I I think you're talking about Not Now Cricket. But that book is just amazing, and don't stop writing. And I totally understand how you felt about that. It's so cruel. Some things would just pop out our mouth, and
It's so tough. And when he's talking about this, these ideas of an imagined transgression, and how we tend to convict ourselves of these transgressions that someone else has put on us as a burden. And yeah, I can see this in a number of different ways out in the world, if you will. And just like when you're a teenager in school, and other people say things to you that you would have never thought for yourself. It's maybe bullies or whoever saying mean things. I was having this thought the other day, and I don't know how I landed on it, but I was sitting here thinking about how many kids are bullied in the world right now on social media, and in their daily lives, and how there's just so much nonsense going on. And yet I wish that there was an easier way to teach kids that they don't have to take that on. They don't have to believe what other people say about them, whatever it is. And but that's kind of what it brought up here, is this imagined transgression, and how much pain we can cause ourselves by feeling these lies that we tell ourselves about what how we have done something wrong, or how we just like in this example of him at the piano and his parents saying that to him, and then imagining the feelings going through him throughout that whole time of I can't, it's because my sister died that I am even able to do this, and that's just a terrible, terrible thing to say or feel or whatever. And we don't have to feel that. We don't have to say those things to ourselves, but we are just the master of saying the nastiest things to ourselves. And it is just, I don't know how we got so good at it, but we do. And it just seems like this kind of never ending cycle of we do it to ourselves, and then we do it to our kids, and then our kids do it to their kids. And even though we're recognizing it as we grow, I mean, I hope that over time that we can break this cycle of this mumbo jumbo we tell ourselves, but I don't know if we will or not. But I mean, even just this second, this other one, the hidden barrier of the crime of outshining other people, and I can see that in play in my life too, and I feel guilty sometimes, and I don't know why. There's no reason for me to feel guilty for having a successful business, right? Or having, finally having gotten a nice property and whatnot. But I constantly, when people are like, oh, it's so beautiful and this and that, da, 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 and it's amazing, I'm like constantly downplaying it. It's like, well, I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for this, or if it wasn't for that. It's only because my kids, my son and his family and us, and we're all working together to pay for this. There's no way I could do it on my own, and even though that's like on one hand, trying not to be bragging, being more humble, obviously, but I also feel, I don't know, I have these feelings of feeling guilty for having success. It's like not too long ago, the silliest thing. I ended up kind of selling my car to my mom because she needed it. And when my husband, he found this other car for me, and it's a BMW, and it is value-wise, it's worth less than my other car was. But yet every time somebody sees this car, they're like, "Oh, you're driving a BMW now," with this whole thing. And I'm just like, "Oh God, not. It's not even worth as much as my Nissan," you know. But it's silly how these things come up in our minds where we have these ideas of, levels of success, and when you have a level of success that from the outside appearances of it would be more than what someone else has, and then you start to feel guilty because of it, because they aren't having the same experience in their life. They may be having success in a whole completely different way, but yet there's these like societal measurements that tell you that, okay, you're technically more successful than someone else, and then I don't know, it's a weird kind of it's a weird thing. I can't even explain it. And I don't know. I don't even know where it comes from, to be honest with you, because I look back at my life and I'm like, why do I have these feelings? I don't know.
And sometimes you don't know, you can't really go back and figure that out. But I think one of the ways that we can try to figure it out is just by looking, really paying attention. Because most of the time we don't. If something comes up that hurts us, we just press it down. We don't necessarily allow ourselves to explore that, because we tend to dislike feeling uncomfortable, or most people feeling vulnerable or whatever. So they just push that stuff down. But if you can recognize it when it happens and just make a mental note to come back and just ask the question, where does that come from? You'll be surprised at what kind of things come up. The outshining one, again, that stuck out to me. I remember as a young girl, I was very enthusiastic and very smart, very organized, which I'm not organized at all now. It's like I went to the opposite extreme on that. But I raised my hand a lot when the teacher asked questions. I always had my hand up, and that kind of got, yeah, I kind of got the message to tone that down a lot. And then when I had such I was very open psychically and stuff. And when I started talking about those experiences, I especially got shut down there, to not do that. So I totally see where he's going. And I love that he's gonna, I'd go into it further and make it a much more practical sort of, okay, so we have them, but now how do we get past them, or how do we recognize them easier? I think it comes with practice, actually.
Definitely some kind of deep contemplating work to try and think through these things that have been holding us back from whatever levels of success, or I don't know. I can see a lot of things at play in my life where I mean, we've had roller coasters of we've been success, and then complete crash, and then success, and then complete crash, and I feel like I can look back on some of that time and be like, well, it's obvious because of this, you know, it's obvious because of that or whatever, you know. But when you're in the middle of it, sometimes it's not as easy to see where you're going wrong, where you're steering yourself wrong. And but I'm glad that we are reading this book because it's kind of helping us to see some of these things that we weren't aware of before. And of course, every time we do that, then we are able to move a little bit further down the line of our personal growth. And yeah, I feel optimistic that maybe I'm not gonna have to go through the roller coaster again and crash again in order to, I don't know, live life or whatever. It's not like it's a required thing where you have to, I guess, you know. It's like, I don't know, everybody says, you know, it's good, then that's not so good, then good, not so good. And I've experienced that, but yet I'm hoping that, you know, maybe we can just kind of keep it in an even keel and keep having a little bit more better results every year and keep on just going on that you know, climb versus the roller coaster experience. So yeah. Well, any final thoughts on this chapter? We've got, let's see, let's go back just a little bit, see what the other barriers were. We had the one that was the disloyalty and abandonment and feeling fundamentally flawed. So that was the 4 barriers for this chapter. I wanted to, you know, that he talked about. Any other final thoughts on those before we go into the next chapter for next week?
I would just like to offer something from another book that Samantha and I have read or are reading. She's probably still reading. And it's called an individuation process, and it's just something that you can sit down, you know, get in a very quiet space in your mind, a place where there's, you know, a meditative space where you're free of thoughts, or thoughts are just excuse me, floating by you. And just get in that space and imagine yourself as your soul, you know, before you came here, how excited you were to come. And then you start there with that excitement, and you go through, you know, if you want to imagine yourself as a star flying across the universe, landing in your mama's tummy, how you felt there, your birth, how you felt there, things growing up that's, you know, significant experiences that stick out to you. And as you know, spend 45 minutes to an hour on this and just write and just keep writing and go through your whole life up until present day, and then go back and read through that. And it'll be painful. You know, some of those, just remembering some of those experiences could bring up emotion. So have some tissues there. You know, if you need to release some emotion, please do, because those trapped emotions cause problems. And then go through that and read through all of that. And then look at these 4 barriers and see in your life where these barriers have popped up, and look back at the previous experiences and see where they originated, you know, where that maybe that one experience that triggered that. And then once you can look at that and recognize that, you can look at, and hopefully he's going to probably cover this in the book going forward, I don't know, but you know, we always try to compensate for these beliefs. So what kind of activities or what kind of things did you do to compensate for those beliefs? Like for me, being a burden was definitely probably one of my major ones. And so I have been so extremely independent in my life to the point of exclusion of friends and family. And that is because I don't want to be a burden, and I recognize that in myself. So when you go back through your individuation process, you'll be able to see where you picked up these things, what kind of coping skills you came up with to deal with these shortcomings that you falsely believe that you have. And then you can see where those play out in your life in every aspect. And it's quite eye-opening and lethargic, or not lethargic, cathartic. And, to get some of that out, you'll get a lot of stuff out when you do this process. So I would just offer that. And I love you guys and look forward to next week.
Thank you for that, Catherine. I understand the idea of just writing. And the only thing that would help me there is for everyone to write what you're thinking about instead of thinking about what you're writing. Just write whatever comes out. It doesn't matter. It's a journal entry, and write what you're thinking, not thinking about what you're writing. Have a good week, everyone.
Yes, thank you for that, Catherine, and that's a good tip, Lori. And something I was just kind of thinking of when you were saying all of that was, you were talking about how your compensating tendency was to be very independent, and that made me think about that too, because I feel like that's a running theme in my life as well, as this just being very independent. And then I was thinking, oh, okay, well, what does that stem from? If it's not this idea of being a burden, what is it from? And kind of some of what kind of went through my mind is some of the arguments that my mom and dad had, and some of the things, the dynamics that they were experiencing, and how I was just not going to be that. That was part of my compensating, or my, not, it wasn't that I was feeling like a burden. I just was not going to be what was playing out in my parents' dynamic. And that idea of not being that was what I feel like drove a lot of my desire to be very independent and to not be, I don't know, dependent on another person for survival, I guess, which is kind of ironic, because with my husband and I being as intertwined as we are in our emotions and dependence on each other, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's funny how we do things to ourselves. But I like how I love getting on here with you guys, because we think of things that we would have ever thought of if we hadn't been having these conversations. And that's something that, even though reading through the book, I would just be thinking about how would I be a burden? How would that show up in my life, and what would that have felt like? But instead, because I didn't see any of that, I didn't really see how I felt like I was a burden in any way. But yet then when you started talking, Catherine, about this whole independent aspect of feeling, being very independent, and then I can look back and see, okay, well, I can see where some of that comes from in my in my history and my growing up life, and some of my antisocial behavior and all of that. I can see where that may have come from, of mixed messages from my parents, and it's just really fascinating. If we can kind of like recognize some of our compensating tendencies of, what is it that we do in our lives, if we recognize, maybe see it as a, this is our, I don't know if you would call it a philosophy of life, I mean, in some ways it might be our philosophy and way of living, of this is who I think I am in terms of, I'm an independent person. I don't depend on anybody. I don't need a lot of friends. I'm this. These are things we tell ourselves, right? So those would be like these kind of running themes through our lives of who we think we are and who we tell ourselves that we are. And maybe we can ask ourselves, okay, why do I feel that? Why do I have this kind of theme running through my life? Maybe before we go into that meditative state, and then be thinking about that as we go into our writing, and then see what comes up. Because I think that I love the idea of just imagining myself as this beam of light, and I'm just all everything and all possibility, and then I come into this human form, and I can look at myself and be like, okay, now I'm contained in this human form, and these are these things that happened, and yet I can still miss seeing some of the things that I could probably use to help myself overcome this, or have better experiences there. But then I have these conversations with you guys, and I can see a whole different perspective on it. So just some thoughts out there for anybody who might be watching. And it's good to get with other people and talk about these things, because you may see something that you just have no idea that you were meant to see. And that helps you go forward in your life in a new and different way. So with that, guys, I just love talking with you. And for those of you who are watching, if you're interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. You can find us on Facebook. Just search for Mindset Mastery Collective. There's a pinned post in the group that has a list of all the replays that we have ever had, all of the videos that we recorded over the past 8-9 years, and then a link to get into this meeting room, because we're on Zoom. So you just use the same link every week to get in here. We always meet on Saturday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific, and then most of the time we go live. Sometimes we don't, though. Sometimes we're just in here having a conversation and not being live on the internet, because it's beneficial to us to have these conversations. And if you want to have a group where you can talk about stuff like this, we'd love to have you. So with that, guys, have a great, awesome, amazing week, and we'll see you next time on the Saturday Morning Mastermind. Bye for now.